Fred. Very nice to meet you all. I have to say that when they described the contents of this conference, I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to talk about, because procurement is not my strong point. However, as I listened to part of the conversation that I've had, it is actually always strangely comforting to be and listen to other industries agonize about their shit so that you don't feel quite so alone. So it's really nice on a group therapy level. It's really nice for me to be here. So anyway, I come from the music industry. Obviously, I've had a sort of multifaceted past. And I thought the thing that was interesting listening to the various conversations was to try and explain kind of what disruption looks like and what it looks like from inside a business and what it does. I was funnily enough, in Cannes the week before last at the Lions doing a talk at the behest of various people in the advertising industry about, is advertising the new rock and roll? So there's weird parallels between our businesses making everything is entertainment now. If it's entertainment, then is it advertising? Is it culture? What is it? So I think there's a lot of synergies, and hopefully you'll find that, that this is interesting to you, but I can't guarantee that it will be. So obviously I'm the headline act because I'm a music person. I'm headlining, so that's really great. I hope you don't all have to leave early to get your cars out of the parking lot before the rush comes. And I'm going to start with a classic trope of the music business, which is a bit of crowd participation. So the best way to kind of describe what the last 8 years in the music industry look like and feel like is to turn you, as a set of music consumers, into a spontaneous focus group, if you will. So I'd just like you to raise your hands. You don't have to stand up. You don't have to do anything weird. You can raise your hands multiple times. I'm just going to fire some questions. Raise your hand if the answer is affirmative, okay? So how many of you listened to a piece of music in the last 24 hours? Good. How many of you did so on the radio? How many of you did so via television? Spotify? YouTube? Snapchat? No one very good over there, very good. You over there, very good. A live concert? Apple Music, iTunes, whatever. Deezer? Thank you. Tidal? Nobody. Via something that you read on a newspaper? Via a friend's recommendation? Via Facebook? Twitter? Okay, how many of you bought an album in the last 24 hours? Right, so that, using a technical term, is why my business is fucked, right? However, actually, it isn't really, because everyone put up their hands to the piece of music. So really what that embodies is two things. One, a shift from buying a product to accessing music. And the other interesting thing as a marketeer or as someone who's involved in marketing is the way that I connect with each and every one of you, Snapchat lady over there versus radio person down there, means that every pathway from my music to your ears has to take multiple different routes. So things like then boring things, but important things like content strategy, paid media, earned media, own media, all come into their own. So actually it's interesting. So let's take a quick look at that shift in slightly more detail. And consider this, when I joined Sony Music, which will be 9 years ago in September, the iPhone had not yet been launched. iTunes was DRM locked. MySpace was the social media of choice. Facebook, Twitter, certainly not Snapchat, none of that existed. And we were still worrying about whether we should unlock the rights management on the software to allow people to share their music. Okay, so that's 8 years ago, not 80. Okay, so this is what we used to do. We made things called albums. That's a little picture of my record collection. I always put it up. It makes me very happy. And we marketed those products to audiences that were waiting to be entertained. Look, here they are. They're all waiting to be entertained. This chap seems to be expecting something slightly interesting. There's that lady up there with a pillbox. I quite like her. She's got quite a wry smile, so maybe she knows something we don't. But they were waiting to be entertained. They were leaning back. And then we told them about our product by getting songs on the radio, getting artists to perform on television, talking about it in a newspaper, putting up a poster that said it was out, getting it in a shop. And then we measured our success, and it was an interesting conversation about league and lag indicators by charts. And charts are simply, how much did I sell last week? And this model served us very, very, very well indeed for, well, best part of 50 years. So how has that changed? So now, this is a picture from inside our office in Derry Street. If any of you would like to come and visit us in High Street, Ken, we'd love to have you. And basically, just a small parenthesis, when we moved in 8 years ago, the walls were white. And so we thought, how can we decorate our building in a way that is representative of who we are and where we're going and what we do? And we commissioned a project with a bunch of art school students at St. Martin's. And the winning person was a guy who's an expert in typography. And he basically tattooed our entire building with the history of the business. And interestingly, the reason I use this picture is because he identified one thing which perhaps we hadn't thought about, which is artists or brands. So our clients decorate the very walls of the building that we operate in. So in the previous one, it was a shelf of albums on a wall. Now it's a wall of brands with no tangible product, potentially. And these are what our audiences look like. So they're no longer leaning back with glasses on, they're leaning in. Not only are they leaning in, but they're broadcasting the moment to another set of audiences who are leaning in somewhere else, but not physically in the space. So that's different. So no brands, not products, leaning in, not leaning back. These are the ways that people discover. And also, these are the places where they talk about stuff. So again, this strange conflation of what is a broadcast medium, what is your distribution channel, what's your marketing platform, all of that out the window. And this is how you now measure, and I know that's not a music example, but this is how you measure success. Engagement, not units. Lead, arguably, not lag. Or lead to understand how to then generate those still ever important sales metrics, the lag ones that actually make sure that our salaries get paid. And so, to me, this is the future. This is the representation of what our business needs to give a shit about. So there's Dave Grohl, very cool man. He's signed to Sony Music. And there's some guy, I found this picture on the internet, who is basically having the moment of his life, because here he is with a cup. There's Dave Grohl pouring his beer into that person's cup. Someone's taken a picture of it because it's so incredible and put it up on the internet, which is where I found it. And obviously, there's some jokes I could make about streaming, obviously the liquid and all of that sort of stuff. I'll spare you those. But what's interesting is that it completely encapsulates the only thing that matters. Someone makes music for them to listen to, the brand. Someone engages with that music and has the ultimate experience. And the connective tissue is beer. I mean, it's basically they are linked in a tenuous moment that will now last forever. And the value that can be generated by that single thread of liquid, metaphorically, is enormous. Because that is a moment that will never be forgotten. And so while I know we're talking about money, sometimes it's better to think about how to do awesome things and then the money follows. And of course, that's why my CFO and I don't always get on. Especially when he saw my expense claim from Cannes, and I told him, look, it's like a string of beer coming through it. Anyway, never mind. But let's talk a little bit about money, because I think that's important. And I think the subtext here, again, speaking with the conference organizers, part of what I was trying to draw out of all of this was to say, well, how to change inside a way a business operates and how it values what it does affect how you make money and how you consider making money. And equally then, because I thought that might be something you don't know or you might be interested in, is how does it feel like to be on the inside of that? Because you as agencies are going through this change. I've done similar talks at various agencies before. But also your clients are feeling this pain as well. So if you use that analogy that anyone who is in the middle is only there because they add value rather than because the grace of God, history, or whatever other spurious reason there might be, then if you're adding value, great. And if you're not, out. You're gone. There's no point for you to be there. And that's fundamentally what the last 8 years have felt like working in a major record label, which is there really any point to us being here? And the good news is there is. But the journey that we've been on, and that's what I'm going to tell you about next, Tour de France is happening now, quite like cycling. Not the actual action, I just like watching it. Is the journey that we've been on is one of trying to figure this stuff out. And this is a really kind of a strange thing, because I think probably some of the findings that we've gotten, we've made many, many mistakes. And again, just to put it in perspective, and it's not a statistic I'm necessarily happy about or proud of, but when I started at Sony Music In the UK, there was 450 people. There's 300 now. So there are real, live, tangible, painful things that happen as a result of having the wrong file size and being disrupted against your will. But at the same time, we have held our profitability, in fact, increased it, and in the process are still in the midst of a fundamental rethink and change of our business model as we move from ownership of product to access to music. So our journey. So where does our journey start? It starts with one simple thing. If you walk into a record company, it's full of jokers like me, dressed like I am, who were in bands and failed to make that into a career, who are now working in music so they can come to work at 10, dressed like this, and hang out with other artists who have made it or who hope to make it, right? But in all of that equation, you would have no doubt, you come into our office, it's decorated with brands of artists, band names, etc. But the thing is, we make stuff for people to listen to, and we've never actually listened to the people we make stuff for. So our intuition 8 years ago was, you know what? Fuck technology, screw worrying about whether it's going to be Facebook or all. Artist and fan. Remember that Dave Grohl picture. The only two things that matter in that equation. There was no record label in that picture. There was no anybody in that picture other than those two. So our thinking was, how can we get as passionate about the audience and the fans as we are indubitably about the music and the artists themselves? Again, you can substitute artist when I say it for brand or client. You do what you like. That's your thing. So, and then the next question was, and how do we put that alongside our passion for the artist at the core of our business rather than at the edge? And how do we build a set of tools that people can actually use in a creative business? Look, nobody joined the music industry to do marketing. They joined it to hang out, to go to gigs, to get free records, and to put their passion and their belief in connecting an artist with their audience. So tools, although it sounds boring, are really important because the better the tool set is, the better you make it. And here there'll be this thing, it's kind of scrolling behind me. And so we built a detailed consumer segmentation that was done as an ethnographic study and presented to the business as a set of documentaries. And so what you've got here is a segmentation. This is now global, so it's in 50 markets around the world. And this is what we use to do everything. Plan our campaigns, do brand partnerships, talk to Spotify and digital. And what you see here is kind of scrolling in the back, and apologies if it's moving quite quickly, is everything that we understand about fans and what we understand about fans in terms of what that means as people who are purveyors and creators of culture, which I would argue many agencies, certainly in the creative end of the spectrum, are, and if they're not, should be, or they won't be around in 5 years. So basically, we literally made it easy, and we did the simplest trick in the book, which is we printed a book with our segmentation, and we gave it to the 10 coolest people in the business and didn't give it to anyone else, even though we had 300 copies printed. And then everyone was like, well, where's my book? So then everyone had the book. Then we started to add a series of things to the book and make it interactive, and then create sound, if you like, playlists for each of the segments. And so it kind of caught fire. And now, a few weeks ago, we were pitching to win Robbie Williams' business, which we did. And at the heart of the pitch was actually insight. We told him about his fans, and he was like, that's really interesting to me. So that's the ultimate accolade in our business. So there you go. That's our thing. Sorry, it was scrolling behind me. But then what we had to do, and this is actually a picture, we hired planners. And this picture was drawn by Dan Hawk, who was one of the first planner that we hired. He came from BBH, and that's his actual drawing. So that was an A3 that we used to start talking about how we changed our campaign planning process to reflect audience inside what we do. Now all of our labels have a planner, which is weird because that doesn't really happen. And that strategist sits alongside the product manager and bridges the journey between insight and audience, because in the end, what we're trying to do is create engagement and connections around a cultural property, and that's how you sell more records. So customer at the core, create insight, set of tools, develop a process, which creates a language, which ultimately becomes our culture. So again, I know this all sounds very woolly to a group of people that are saying, yeah, okay, where's the pennies and pounds? But actually, this is how you get there. And this is 8 years in the making, and it's still going on. I still get people saying, screw the insight, we're just doing this. And actually, sometimes that's precisely the right thing to do. So what are some lessons, if I could be so bold. The most important question we ask ourselves is not what are we doing, which is what everyone does. Everyone jumps to execution all the time, is why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Why is it going to work? That's the most important question, because answering that question is what ultimately, to me, releases more pathways to value and allows you to look more laterally at where that value, where that revenue, where that money will actually come from. But you don't start by chasing the money. You start by thinking, how am I going to make something that works? And therefore, why it works, or why could it work, why should it work, and how does that fit into a cultural context, a target audience's needs? It's all about joining into moments now. That becomes the most crucial question that anyone can ask themselves. I mean, I ask myself that question every day, not just about work. Then you've got the added advantage in the world that we live that data comes back. The data in and of itself is totally useless. It's the difference between noise and music. But if you process that data and if you're clever about it, actually it starts to help you look at the how, what, where, and when. So whereas we use our segmentation and our insight and our ethnographic studies and all that sort of stuff to think about what should our strategy be for artist X, we then use actual real data, and that includes financial, sales data, streaming data, et cetera, to figure out is what we're doing effective and should we be moving it around. So when you then think about it in more practical terms, you've got your segments loaded into our media agency's buying tool. So we buy our segments based on, where we buy our media based on our segments, and we're often moving microscopically small amounts of money every day, because we don't have very big budgets. We have, we release about 400 to 500 albums a year. Each one of those is a campaign. Our average spend is less than 10 grand. I mean, for Beyonce, it's a lot. And for like a little baby act, it's nothing, or virtually. So that's how we then use it. And that's where KPIs and metrics start to come into it, because then the conversation has to be, well, hang on a minute, what does good look like? I was in a management meeting earlier today in which we were talking about whether the album was dead. And it actually ended up about, are we measuring the wrong thing? Are we still, we're in an environment where all of you consumed a track, none of you consumed an album, and I'm still trying to figure out why the 2 people that bought an album, why I can't keep my lights on. Whereas in fact, everyone put up their hand for consuming a song and all of you paid for it. I didn't ask about piracy, but I'm assuming, right? So the other thing that this allows us to do is to have ideas. And again, I think that is the lifeblood of our business, to think about, well, how are we going to make these clever connections and how are we going to do that, which is what creatives do. So again, we did a lot of work as an ex-management consultant. I did a lot of work looking at how ad agencies were structured and trying to extract the bits that were interesting into our label business. And for me, the idea that a campaign has a strategist, a delivery person, and a creative was really important. So we've tried to mirror that where we can. And fundamentally, in the end, this is what you have to get right. The bit where you've got a load of things you want to talk about in relation to your brand, artist, whatever, and people are doing a whole bunch of other stuff, much of it which you tend to think they're more interested in you than they actually are. So hitting that sweet spot becomes very, very important, because that's then within that little slice, that little kind of overlap in the Venn diagram, that's where the value lies. And so I suppose, why am I qualified to say this? What's my best example of how all this stuff that I've told you, which I assume you're thinking is relatively theoretical and woolly, is One Direction. So One Direction, 5 albums. Okay, they're on a hiatus now. They haven't broken up, as far as I know, although they all have lucrative solo deals with us, so that's nice. Well, 2 of them do anyway. One's not even on there anymore. Think about that. But basically, these guys were at the height of their pomp, a £100 million turnover business employing over 100 people, right? And we created that and saw value not just from the record sales, although they were remarkable, but fundamentally they were, if you like, the Beatles of social media. Again, as a Beatles fan, that pains me slightly to make that statement, but and I think that's what's interesting. They mirror our best example of insight was used, strategy was used. We looked at measuring KPIs differently. We almost strategically thought about how are we going to build an entertainment brand, and almost not worry about making any money from the recorded music, which, when you're a recorded music company, is quite a leap of faith. But what's been interesting is because of the success of the band, and it's certainly not just down to us, they worked hard, they're talented, they have a very enlightened management team. There's lots of other people, agents, et cetera, that come into the picture that are working there, all of whom have a claim on a slice of the value, which is another problem. We couldn't, like, I wish I owned all of that. It's almost like we're like venture capitalists that invested in a shoe factory, but we only earn on the laces, right? And then the market switches to Velcro, and you're like, what just happened? I know that's a bit of a weird metaphor, but you know, anyway, whatever, it is lunch soon. And so I think for me, that's the best representation. So there was a huge amount of value. That did more than keep our lights on, and it allowed us to sign another ton of artists, hopefully some of which will turn out to be the next One Direction, the next Beyonce, the next Bruce Springsteen, the next Bob Dylan, all of whom are signed to us. But they certainly taught us more about how you operate in this world than any other thing we'd done previously. And therefore now it's perfectly okay for us to have a conversation about what's the average revenue per fan over their lifetime. How are we gonna create a PLC or a limited liability company around this kind of artist? And therefore thinking in very different ways about what value means, how you get a slice of it, what investment you have to put in, and how you configure a team of people. Again, when I say they employed over 100 people, about 5 of them were in Sony Music. So there were, there's stylists, there's body. I mean, the whole entourage is quite epic, frankly, especially with them when there was like constantly 1,000 girls parked up outside our office for like 2 years. So that's my kind of case study of why I think there's some credibility in what I'm saying. Obviously, I know it's hard to bridge the abstract, the theoretical, and the strategic to the real, so that was my kind of attempt to do it. I am going to take some questions if there is time for questions, if people would like to ask any. And that's all I've got to say for myself, frankly.
The revolution or change in the music industry in the last 10 years is, when you look back on it, phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Do you believe it came about by a series of many, many, many baby steps? Or was there ever, do you think, a master plan back 8-9 years ago when you said, we're never going to get revenue from selling vinyl anymore, so we've got to come up with new ways? I mean, which is a kind of a very academic way of looking at it. Or was it lots and lots of little things that built it to where it is today?
We fell off a cliff and we were pushed. We didn't jump. As an industry, this is an industry that has almost halved in value in 20 years. It's an industry where, the excesses of can now looks like a vicar's garden party compared to the music industry in the 80s and 90s. It was an industry that just made money hand over fist and didn't have to care. And it had control of distribution, control of product, control of price. And basically the fundamental problem was a total loss of control in every single department all at the same time. So the idea of hiring strategy people like me, of bringing in other competencies, of building, those all came about after the fact. It's like, oh shit, now what are we gonna do? Because this is not good. And of course, the thing is that we still do often have success the old-fashioned way. So that's the other thing, and it's a kind of slightly corny analogy, but we're like an airplane that's flying at 35,000 feet, and someone says, do you know what, the wings are on fire, we need to fix this thing, it's broken, but we can't just we have to land it. So there was a plan. The plan came after the fact. I think everyone, for many times, and this is what happens to businesses, is they don't see the change coming until it's too late. Look at recent political events in this country, without wanting to dwell on that too much. But so that's the thing is, it's only when it's late/too late that people say, shit, I should have thought of that. But at the same time, I think we as human beings, we love progress, but we don't like change. And actually, they're two sides of the same coin. So we had to quickly figure out what our strategy was. And it's an ongoing process. I think every time something else pops up, we're like, is Apple Music the new CD? There's always a hope that there's going to be something that comes in and replaces all the lost value, but most of our profit has potentially forever drifted away to tech companies, and it won't be coming back necessarily. So that's just something we have to live with now. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think there's a massive analogy, and I often think, do we have to have a bigger crisis? Does one of the networks or groups have to completely fail before we wake up?
I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
I hope not. but I think it's a really interesting, insightful observation and lesson. Yeah, let's hope we don't make it.
Hello, I'm Rick Hurst. I'm the CEO of McGarry Bowen, a creative business. I'm about to start to take the role as CEO of Cara, a media business in the same group. I thought today was brilliant for everyone, by the way. Everyone's talked. I really enjoyed it. I read Chris Anderson's piece in Wired magazine about freemium. One of the examples he quotes in that was about the Chinese music business and how the Chinese music business now has got to a situation where they actively give away the content of their artists for free because their whole business model is then built around concert tickets and merchandise.
Yep.
Now, that's a risk. That's a risk for me. It's a really big risk, because unfortunately what that means, therefore, and I wanted to understand from your perspective how you run your business, the music, then the production of the music then becomes an input. It's a cost to the business. One Direction, they're four very nice lads, will lose a lot of fans if they don't make another album in the next 5 years or whatever. You know, they've got to fuel it. But the problem we've got, and I think the problem we face, is that therefore signifies the bit that made them great in the beginning, a cost. And the pressure, therefore, is how do you make that? Means then somebody's now going to look at that as a cost rather than as a piece of quality. So how do you balance the investment of that to make sure that what you are actually also putting out is brilliant quality, not just fuel?
Well, that's a very good question. And the truth is, while the value of music has stayed constant, that the price has tended towards zero, yet the cost of making an album and delivering a platinum-selling global superstar hasn't gone down in the same amount. But the question is that an issue of cost, or is it an issue of funding? So if you look at, not the Chinese model, but it's not dissimilar, look at hip-hop. If you want to understand where we need to go as a business, look at what rappers do, because they're always 20 years ahead of everyone else. Right? So what do? You put out a mixtape. When Future, who's signed to us, is bored of waiting for us to approve a thing, he just drops the mixtape, keeps the conversation going, and then launches a sneaker range, does a partnership with this, that, the other thing, whatever it is. So the point is, they are custodians of a brand, and they understand that we are a funding partner for them for a portion of it, but equally as our power reduces, or as the revenue stream from that piece of investment, they flip to thinking of themselves as a brand. And therefore, they're just looking at, and one of the interesting projects that we're doing at the moment is speaking to early stage investors, venture capital funds, private equity houses, to understand what analogies are there between a Mark Zuckerberg of tomorrow sitting in a dorm somewhere and creating Facebook, and some kid in Scotland called Calvin Harris sitting down with a laptop and becoming one of the world's greatest, largest, highest paid EDM superstars. The Calvin Harris brand is another one that's worth hundreds of millions of pounds a year, right? So I think the issue becomes one of funding. And the thing is that because our revenue model is premised on monetizing our investment via recorded music, we take a narrow view. But if we can think about a different thing where the recorded music is part of a conversation. So again, in the 70s, you made an album and then you toured to promote the album. Now you drop an album to justify going on tour because that's where you make your money. So you're looking at all the revenue streams to remunerate all the cost bases, which of course then means that we have to go back and look at what rights are we signing in the first place, because if we keep signing album deals, we are screwed. So I think the thing, I don't see it as an issue of cost. If you can get a piece of the whole brand, it's an issue of investment. I'm not sure if that really answers it. It's probably more complicated than that. But that's where it feels like it's headed. And for a while, what the music industry did, the recorded music industry did, is these things called 360 deals, where they said, right, you want to sign to us, instead of giving you a £100,000 advance for a 5-album deal, we'll give you a £500,000 advance, but we want 15% of everything. And they were like, hang on a minute, but what are you doing for those other things? What value are you adding to touring, nothing. It's just our business model is screwed and we need a bit more cash to cover our costs. And they're like, well, that's not going to work, is it? So now we are invested in touring businesses. We have a partnership with a merch company. So we're able to offer those things as services to justify the fact that the conversation still has to be about music. And you need to record that music and get it out, and that has a cost. The other thing to say, which is interesting about encased in your question, is about old and new and the power of catalog. And I think an interesting and exciting development is historically, catalog is what has always driven our business. So the old has always funded the new. The interesting thing about how do you call it, like a timeline view of cultural consumption, where something is in front of you on your feed, whatever feeds you're on, or behind you, means that everything that you don't know is new, regardless of when it was recorded. So because it's about the key trigger for music consumption at the moment is time of day, mood, emotion, and activity, I have so many opportunities to continue remarketing. It's not that I don't care if One Direction never put out another record, but there's still a lot of mileage because I'm feeling sad. Boom. Oh, there's best song ever. Or, so do you know what I mean? You can actually continually remarket stuff because if it's in front of you in the feed, there's a chance you're going to consume. So that wasn't really your question, but I just thought I'd answer that one as well because I like that question. I like that point.
What I think it does, though,
yeah,
suggests to us as agencies that we've heard a lot today about justifying value and creating value. Mm-hmm. You know, in the old world, you were the only way an artist could get from
Correct.
a bedroom to a radio station.
Correct.
What you've done now is you've said to an artist, you could do that on your own. A YouTube account and some software and a laptop, you can do that on your own. We're going to actually create the ecosystem around you. And I think that's the bit that I think we need to learn from, which is we can't just keep doing the same thing we're doing and just hoping at some point someone's going to go, oh, you guys don't get paid enough. It's just not going to work.
You'd be amazed how little sympathy people have for us, generally speaking.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No more? We're done? Okay, sorry. Okay, fine.
I think that's it for the morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.